Welcome to Municipal Voice, CCM's radio podcast in collaboration with WNHHLP 103.5 FM, connecting Connecticut's municipalities. We're your source for news on the municipal level across the state of Connecticut. I'm your host, Matt Ford, and in the studio with me today is John Filchak, Executive Director of the Northeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, and Brendan Sharkey, former Speaker of the House and a member of Ned Lamont's transition team on shared services. Shared services is the topic we're going to be talking about today. So, Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, start with you. The quick definition, what is shared services?
Shared services technically is one or more municipalities doing together what they otherwise would do individually.
Mm-hmm.
We try to expand that and get that into many more than two.
More than, yeah.
Ideally, we get it to, in our case, we have 16 towns, but make it fully regional. In several of our programs, we go beyond the region.
Mm-hmm.
Towns outside the region take advantage of what we want.
Okay. Brendan, how do you look at shared services?
Well, I think John, who, by the way, is also a member of the Lamont transition team,
two. All right,
and a member of the Shared Services Committee, in addition to being the executive director of the NECOG. I think shared services is really, frankly, and I think the charge of the group in the Lamont transition was to reimagine how we provide local services on the municipal and the Board of Ed side at a town level. The term that we used in our committee was disruptive. I think we really need to reimagine,
stir some stuff up.
Right.
Okay.
We've done a lot of the shared services that people traditionally think of already, right? And towns and cities have done a lot of
like
sharing.
Regional school districts, that sort of thing.
Well, that has historically been done, but even smaller things like animal shelters or sharing public works equipment and those kinds of things. That's all been done, and that's great, and it has been done in many cases in spite of state leadership. They've done it on
their own. Resistance over the years to this in a lot of ways.
Well, the state just hasn't really been supportive.
Okay.
It's not structured to be supportive of these kinds of things. So in the legislature, when I was there, we pushed very hard to move some of the obstacles out of the way so the towns could do more of this kind of thing.
Okay.
And now we're imagining how we really should be doing it in an ideal world.
That's great. So one of the ways that towns can do this together is through the COGs, right?
Correct.
Could you explain a little bit what COGs are to the general public who may not know about them?
Well, the COGs in Connecticut, we have 9 regional councils of governments.
Okay.
And we made that change, I believe, in 2014 or 15. Made that mandatory, so that we had 15 planning regions before that. That had various, basically 3 different configurations. But we switched to the COG because the leadership of a COG are the chief elected officials of the member towns.
Okay.
So the people most responsible locally are the people around the table making decisions.
So it's not random people. It's already the elected officials that the voters chose.
Correct. So they're responsible to their respective communities. They make their decisions. So if they wish to do something regional, they're accountable back to their towns.
Okay. And your particular COG, who do you represent?
I have 16 towns in the northeastern corner. We go as far west as Union and as far south as Voluntown.
That's great. So when we were talking about some of the things that can be accomplished, one of the kind of smaller ones that you've done already that's worked out really well was the Animal Services Program Center in Dayville, right?
Right. We have about
what happened with that project?
I mean, that project's one of about 40 that we offer regionally. That one started in 2004 with 3 towns. Now has 18 towns, including 5 towns outside of our region.
So not even within the COG itself.
Oh yeah, it's grown quite large. It's one of our bigger programs, and really, we moved in all cases. Those towns had a part-time animal program to a full-time 24/7, 365 program, and really there it saves some money, but more importantly, it's improved the efficiency of the services, and that's a lot of times with the regional approach. Is towns don't necessarily have the capacity to do it by themselves, or if they can only do it on a part-time basis. Whereas if you can join the monies together, we can do on a full-time basis what they could otherwise
Have
do.
dedicated staff to
And bring some expertise. We do that with land use. We do that with property revaluation. We have the only regional property reval program in the state. That's about a 50% savings of going traditional for our town. So it does work. And as we were talking earlier, it works at the edges and they're great programs. Part of what we're trying to get at with the shared services, with the transition team, is really to bring it up multiple notches to get to what Brendan was referring to as disruptive, and really make some serious changes as to how we deliver services in the state.
So we're really thinking big picture on all this.
Yeah.
And you've talked about going big. So you guys came out with, the committee came out with a report yesterday, right?
Right.
And among other things, you talked about the Uniform Chart of Accounts, which is a little bit of a controversial one, but a big piece of this, right?
It is.
Can you explain what a Uniform Chart of Accounts is and entails?
One of the things about pursuing all these initiatives is that they tend to make people's eyes glaze over a little bit when you're trying to describe these things. It gets a little wonky. But think about it. It's critical. It's all about data. So the Uniform Chart of Accounts is a common ground where towns and boards of education report their actual expenses into a data system that can compare those costs apples to apples between towns and among boards, so that you can actually measure how efficiently a town or a board of education is actually providing that particular service. And once you have that data, then you can start making some intelligent decisions about how much the state wants to subsidize performance at the local level. If a community believes that, for example, they have 4 or 6 fire districts, each like West Haven does, each with their own mill rates, and the cost.
Individual fire districts have their own mill rate.
The cost of that system, which politically is entrenched in the town. I'm not picking on West Haven, but in towns that have this kind of setup, it's very expensive.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of history in all these towns.
That's right.
We have
towns
that are 300 years old, and
and this is
those traditions.
That's right, and that's how these things developed. But if it turns out that the towns that have, let's pick on that as the example, are spending 3 or 4 times the amount per capita for their fire protection services as another town with a similar population
within Connecticut.
We have to start making some decisions. Should the state and state taxpayers be subsidizing that kind of inefficiency, or should we start demanding, a tough word, but should we be incenting a town who has that kind of a system to maybe change things up, make things more affordable locally, and do that by tying state grants to what a municipality, how efficiently a municipality actually operates. And so that's also, so the only way to really measure that in an objective way is through this Uniform Chart of Accounts.
Like a standard metric.
Right. It's already established. It already exists.
It does exist.
You go to the OPM website. It's right there. It's just data starved. There's no data.
So is part of that making it mandatory that they have to put the information in?
It's one of our recommendations from the Shared Services Committee that the governor require towns and boards of ed to enter and provide this data in real time right away by June 30th. So that then you can start thinking about how do you want to restructure your grant programs to municipalities to reflect those realities. And by the way, that's where the COGS come in and their counterpart on the education side, which is the Regional Education Service Centers, the RESCs.
The RESCs. I want to talk about those in a second, but on this Uniform Chart of Accounts, so is there anything in place now that's required to do anything? Like, what's the system now? It's just kind of voluntary?
The system that we have in place was something that we adopted when I was still speaker. And it was bond money that was paid to Bloom Shapiro to establish this system and make it accessible online. It exists, but the only data that's in it right now is from 2014, because we didn't mandate or require, bad word, the M word.
We're not a big fan of the mandate.
Right, but we didn't require towns and boards to actually provide the data. So as a result, what you see, it's a really easy to operate tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably one of the, according to Bloom Shapiro, it's one of the best that they've ever done nationally. And yet, without the data, you can't really utilize it to the extent that it can and should be used.
Yeah. Now you did say the M word.
Yeah.
So would requiring all the towns to provide this, was there any inherent cost in that? Do they have to hire anybody, or it's just do they already have the info?
They've got the information.
It's just a matter of putting it in.
And they don't have to actually adjust their data to kind of fit this statewide model, because that's the beauty of the system. It's designed to extrapolate.
So whatever their reporting system is,
it translates
it against the others.
Right. That's right.
So is that like a case of different structures of departments or titles?
Right.
And
Exactly. And
some towns, one person has 2 jobs, that sort of thing.
That's right. Or, they might call things differently. A maintainer in one town might be a sanitarian in another.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you make sure those job titles are accurately reflected? Those kinds of things. Bloom Shapiro has worked that all out. So that's all in the system.
So, I mean, talking about all these complicated things, we were talking about the risks and sort of these different overlapping sort of units that we're talking about, the cogs, the risks. So what's a risk? A risk?
What's a risk?
A risk.
RESC, I'm sorry. A RESC, the Regional Education Service Center, is you can look at them as the counterpart to the COGS, just on the education side. They've been around since, I think, the 1970s, and there's 6 of them in the state.
Okay.
Again, it's a regional approach. They offer a whole range of services. Varies a little bit from RESC to RESC, from special ed services and trainings to adult education to a number of them run schools.
Okay.
They, similar to us, they can pretty much do whatever a Board of Education can do.
Mm-hmm.
We can do anything that a municipality can do on our side. So we pretty much have the spectrum of issues covered, if you will, locally.
Yeah. One thing we talked a little about before the show, and you were talking about the risk, and one side doing what the town does, as doing the Board of Ed does, is we do have that separation in Connecticut. What's the dynamic there as far as shared services?
Well, yeah, we do have a separation between towns and boards, but we don't have separate taxing authority.
Okay.
Right. So the municipal side of government levies the taxes.
You pay your taxes to the town.
To the town. And then the town writes a check, one lump sum check.
To the Board of Ed.
To their local Board of Ed.
Okay.
They have no further ability to manage or have any input on how the Board of Ed spends that money.
So they're writing the check, they're sending the money, but
in many towns, that's 70-80% of the town's, what the town is raising in taxes. It's 70 to 80% of what they're raising goes to the Board of Ed, and then the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance can't touch it.
Okay.
So one of the other recommendations that we've made is, so again, something disruptive, but maybe you have the boards of ed have their own taxing authority. Maybe they set their own mill rate and levy the taxes themselves. So they're directly accountable to the taxpayers rather than being insulated from the taxpayers through the Board of Selectmen or through the town
So when they
council.
choose to spend in a certain way, they are answering to the public.
Directly to the public. It's also, I think there's an argument to be made that's much more transparent.
Okay.
Because many towns don't really require their boards of ed to report out line item by line item how they're spending the money or they're transferring internally. They don't have those kinds of controls. Some towns do. But if you're reporting to a statewide uniform chart of accounts, you've got to do that.
Yeah.
And again, this is all in an effort to create transparency and accountability for how the money is spent.
Okay. So, for instance, right now, I live in New Haven. I pay my property taxes to the city, where that goes to the city. So, if we did this idea, I would get 2 different tax bills?
Yeah.
And would the total of those be more than the old one, or is it just divided differently?
Just divided.
Yeah.
And it's the way most municipalities and governments do this statewide, or throughout the country.
Okay.
I mean, I always use this analogy. Think of Monopoly. When you lay it on chance, there's a card that says pay school tax of $15.
Yeah.
Well, because that's the way every other part of the country does it. There is a school tax. You get a separate bill for your school tax. And then there's another bill for your municipal tax. So the idea is that rather than having boards of ed one step removed from the taxpayer
Mhm.
in terms of how they're spending taxpayer money. You actually make Board of Ed members more directly accountable
Yeah.
to the taxpayers.
There's not one bill that's the school and getting my road plowed and whatever else. It's
Right.
this is what you're spending on education, and this is everything else essentially.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now it's controversial,
Well,
and in some towns that doesn't work because there's a good relationship between town and
Mhm.
board, and there is a lot of transparency. So that doesn't necessarily translate everywhere. But
Yeah.
the overall point is that a lot of money goes to education, and in many cases, the visibility into how it's being spent is not there.
Okay. I know when we've talked about this at CCM in the past, we have suggested that CCM, along with the COGS and a few other groups, going to put together a blueprint for what this would look like in the future. And obviously, you both being on the transition team have thought about this blueprint. So, what is the future? How do you see the future, and what needs to be done?
Well, in terms of that, I mean, part of our focus on that was we need first at a state level to build the infrastructure to support these regional and shared services,
Mhm.
and we believe that that needs to be at the highest level, right at the governor's level, and in specifically OPM. There's an intergovernmental relations division within OPM.
Okay.
It has been over the years been stripped of its capacity to deliver the services, and some of the services we're talking about, honestly, they never did deliver. So I think
Okay.
there's 4 people there now, and so their ability is very limited to do what we're looking
And keep in mind,
to do.
municipal aid is 20 to 25% of the overall state budget.
Yeah.
And yet we don't have anybody in state government who is really singly responsible for how that money is getting spent and helping to create efficiencies to
Mhm.
make sure it's being spent wisely. I'm sorry.
So
I interrupted you.
if you go to other states, even our neighbor Massachusetts, they have a lot of resources there
Mhm.
to assist municipalities as to how do you do this, how do you do that, just simple functional things. So we envision it on that level. This invigorated ACIR, the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. Currently, that's a 24-member body, a lot of vacancies on it. I've been on it for several years. We've gone big stretches where it hasn't
Mhm.
even met. We need to restructure that in terms of its membership and its focus to be a policy body that assists the governor in saying, okay, how do we do these things?
Yeah.
You know, we lay out the infrastructure. Okay, how do we address these things? We can bring these good minds together
Mhm.
so that we're doing that on a continuous basis and saying, this is best practices or these are changes in statute, et cetera. So we kind of taking where the Moore Commission was and broadening it and have it on a continuum. So here we've got a place to say, what about this?
Yeah.
And we can deal with those issues, and then have the infrastructure within OPM to say, okay, these are the variety of grants and aid to towns and cities,
Mhm.
and this is how we deal with it. So part of this is taking things from other agencies, perhaps, and coalescing them within OPM instead of maybe that being at DECD or DEEP or whatever other agency they might be, and truly have a robust division there that right there at the right hand of the governor,
Yeah.
if you will, to make things happen.
So it sounds like that right now there's some stuff that's shared around to different departments that
Well,
maybe you're
yeah.
suggesting should be
So-
underneath one sort of umbrella.
Right, and so that's that level, and also we've got a variety of state agencies that have been through personnel reductions, through retirements and cuts. Their capacity to deliver services to towns and cities have been diminished.
Yeah.
Towns have been diminished in terms of their capacity. The COGS and the RESCs are in a unique position to fill that void and to be able to say, well, DOT or DEP or whoever, maybe you can't do it anymore, but we're in a position
Maybe
to
we
do
could.
that. And similar with the towns. So, we don't have county government in the state. We're probably never going to have it, but we don't really need it.
Yeah.
We have a mechanism to deliver comparable services without that added level of bureaucracy, but we have accountability because we have the CEOs in charge. This is sort of, if that's the vision, there's the
Yeah.
vision. We just have to take the steps to get there.
Yeah. And you mentioned that we don't have counties in the state, which we got rid of in 1960 around.
Yeah,
right?
but they were never functional.
They were
So
never fun. But
people
in
kind
a
of
lot
talk
of when we talk
nostalgically
about,
like we
yeah.
had counties and if we had just kept
Yeah.
them. Well, they never did anything. So
But when we talk about other states and success, oftentimes we are talking about counties in other places, right?
Most of the things that we're talking about are things that are done at the county level.
On a county level, not on a town level.
In most other states that are in the country.
All right. Let me pause for one moment to let you know that you are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, broadcasting live from downtown New Haven. We are streaming live on TuneIn Radio and newhavenindependent.org. We're also streaming live on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/newhavenindependent or go to CCM's Facebook page and look us up. All right. You mentioned, sorry.
One thing I just want to add to that, that we haven't addressed, central to this whole thing is the property tax and getting a handle on that. We're paying a very large percentage in terms of taxes, 42% as a state, and that hits everybody and is a very regressive tax.
Yeah, it's a big issue for our membership, certainly.
Part of our goal with the Shared Services Committee is, okay, let's drop that. Let's set a goal of we think is achievable, is let's knock it down to 32%. Not talking about raising other taxes, but through efficiencies and doing things smarter. We think that's absolutely achievable in the short run.
Yeah, I mean, I know, there's numbers all over the place. We talked about getting too wonky, but there was one good one. The New England Public Policy Center, in a 2013 study, said that consolidating 106 emergency call centers would reduce costs by 60%. 60.
Yes.
Why do you think that doesn't happen?
Well, I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
Politics.
Okay.
Right? Politics.
Man, what are the obstacles?
Sure. Well, I mean, we're talking about low-hanging fruit. I think people point to this often. California has 10 emergency call centers for the entire state of California.
Okay. And we had,
over
at least in
100.
2013, we had 106.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, what happens locally is that these are centers of power, for lack of a better term, and political influence within police departments at the local level. To the idea that you would take away a call center means there are jobs that would be affected by that, which is we absolutely have to consider. But it's also about kind of control. And so oftentimes what you see is that, and I know this from firsthand because I proposed consolidating these when I was still Speaker of the House. The chiefs of police throughout the state oppose these things by saying to their residents, this is about your safety. Do you? And they've I think been able to convince local residents who are used to, telephone wires connecting with their police department, that you're going to have more responsive, better response times if your call center is located in town. Well, this is
a phone rings no matter where it is.
Yeah, this is 2018. I mean, a phone call can be made anywhere and dispatched anywhere in an instant. So there's no need to have separate centers to receive calls, many times sitting vacant and sitting dormant for hours on a day, and all the expenses that go with that in every single town.
Just rewind back to that for a second. Call center like 911, you would call and there would be nobody there?
Well, or
at a certain time of day?
Well, no, that they just don't have as many calls. They don't have a call volume to support having their own separate
There's not that
center.
many emergencies in that town that day.
Right. So, and what difference does it make whether the call goes into a central place in pick a town, Weathersfield, but then it's instantly dispatched out down to Hamden
to the closest,
right, to wherever the police department is, right? That's the way California does it. That's the way every other state in the country does it. But yet we choose to do it this way, just because politically this is something that is a form of political control that chiefs of police tend to want to hold on to. So what we're proposing is, okay, if you want to do that, that's fine. But we can measure how much you're spending for your E911 call center through that uniform chart of accounts.
Okay.
Right? We can determine that you are spending too much money for a call center as compared to comparable sized towns in the state.
Okay, so it's the size of the town is an important part.
That's a factor. Relative wealth of the town is a factor, but then how much you're actually spending per capita is a factor. And we can tell that this is not, objectively speaking, not anecdotally, but we can tell that this is not effective financially. So you know what? You can do that. But the state's not going to subsidize that inefficiency.
Got it.
Right.
So you're saying it is based on the wealth of the town too. So if you're trying to measure apples to apples, and you say someone needs to hire a certain position in Greenwich versus somewhere in maybe the northeast corner or something, that sort of position would pay different in that town, and
No,
that's reasonable, or how does that work?
What I'm suggesting is that state financing and support and aid to local government and boards of ed, right, should have an element of efficiency measurement tied to it. So when you get a formula grant from the state, one of the measurements for how much money you get from the state, whether it's, whatever, pick the grant, is going to be measured in part by how efficiently your town is operating.
Okay.
If you choose to run your town less efficiently, I think
that's up to you.
That's up to you. But that the rest of the state taxpayers should not be subsidizing that inefficiency, right? Similar to E911 centers, there are targeted grants for these particular call centers, and that should not be granted out as just a blank check to towns all over. That should be tied to an efficiency matrix. You get money if you're running your E911s more efficiently. The way to do it more efficiently is to tie in to a regional center, and that way you can do it much more efficiently, and you can be eligible then for additional grants. So you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the state currently has a system of putting out state aid on a formula basis without any regard to efficiency. And that's the other big change we need to make. Data-driven, but performance-based. We can measure how much you're spending locally. And if you're spending too much, you're not going to get the same level of funding from the state as your neighbor, comparably sized, who is operating much more efficiently.
And I think, just to add to that, I mean, if you go back through the Malloy administration, even back before to Rel, Rowland, and even Wenker, municipal aid is pretty much you've got your series of grants, and you get those grants. And Governor Malloy's, sort of protected those lines. But those lines have sort of been there. They haven't really changed too much. We have a Pequot grant, for instance.
Okay.
From the slot machines. Most people don't understand how that's divvied up.
Yeah, where does that go?
You get your Pequot money.
Okay.
60% goes to the major towns, and there's a little deal for the towns that are most impacted, and everyone gets some piece of that. And depending on how slot revenues go, that goes up and down and so forth. But you get that, and it's to do what? And how do you use it?
So it's just kind of handed over.
There's Town Aid Road. We have a Transportation Institute at UConn that talks about pavement management. And a lot of towns do wonderful work on how they use those funds in terms of pavement longevity, et cetera. There are towns that still are using techniques from the 1960s. So we don't have those metrics on there. And I think the message that's been hanging out there for a while, especially in terms of the size of the deficit that still sits out there and will be here with us, it is those days of just, here it is, do what you wish, have to be over. That efficiency and accountability and transparency are going to be the rule, not the exception. So part of what we're trying to get at is, how do you do that? If you want to do your own thing, fine. But what I think we're looking at is you're not going to get rewarded for that, if you will, going down the line. Maybe that's a little harsh, and I work for 16 towns, and maybe that's blasphemy, but that's the message I try to tell them is, you're going to have to, even though you try as hard as you can, you're going to have to try harder because the money's just not there. I mean, it's just a reality.
And you need to have a system of state government that promotes this and supports this. It provides the resources to be able to do this.
And by no means does that mean that that the state walks away from its support to its municipalities.
Right.
But it's really saying we've got to do business differently, whether it's on the education side or on the municipal side. I mean, we have that report that looked at 911 centers. They also looked at the 73 health departments we have, which is just a picture of inefficiency and just the inconsistency of service delivery. When you have a robust, regional health district, or even one that say might be based like here in New Haven, as compared to a small town with a part-time doctor that does it. When we're talking about international threats with smallpox and other things, we really in a state like Connecticut, we should have a robust system. Makes sense to be regionalized.
Yeah.
But we're way behind the times on that, and there's really no excuse on that front. We've put in things like the Uniform Charter of Accounts, but also with that, to both education and towns, was built the Nutmeg Network, this robust fiber
High-speed
optic
internet, yeah.
connection to all 169 towns. So we've got some of the the infrastructure's there. We've got to take it the next steps, and I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Is we've got to kick it up a notch, and more than a notch, multiple notches.
And we were talking about it's not just saving money. Obviously, the saving money is a big part of it and brought on by the economic realities of the state, but it's also about better service.
Right. Because, when you take my region, for instance, I have 34 fire departments.
Mhm.
It's all volunteers. This time of day, it's all people who are paid because they're buying part-time people to come in and do it because they just don't have the volunteers to do it. We're doing an examination now because we have a very big concern of what are the response times in terms of pre-emergency care. Somebody has a car accident, minutes count. So are we better or are we worse? We don't have the data right now, but should we be changing how we do things? Should we be consolidating those 34 fire departments and 12 ambulance companies into sub-regional centers? We have to be thinking like that because, what worked in 1974 is not working in 2019.
A lot of legacy sort of structure from realities that aren't really on the ground
land of steady
anymore.
habits is not smart.
Yeah. I personally, one thing I ran into, you mentioned health districts. And in a previous life, I was doing marketing for a business, and we had a big event, and we wanted to get in the food trucks. They all had their permits from the New Haven Health District. We were in another town. It was not in that district. All those trucks had to then go out and get new health permits, even though they were already permitted in New Haven to be in that town. And are the standards actually different? Do you need those two separate things? And why is one of those licenses three times as much as the other?
I can't speak to the food truck, but I can tell you this: with our animal services program, we deal with 3 different health departments. They approach our issues with animals in 3 different ways.
I mean, I guess that's
makes me a little
another
crazy.
aspect of this is all these overlapping sort of different things. It's not just towns sharing service, but there's stuff that's already out there.
There's
a lot of
delivery
different
of
layers and
fundamental services, and then there's things like we're trying to grow a state economically, and this is not part of our report, but it may grow into this at some point. But we do economic development town by town, 169 variations on a theme. We'll say, this company X wants to be in New Haven, so we only talk to New Haven. We don't talk to we don't think of these things as regional or statewide, benefits. We have to really change the way we do that so that we're not just looking at it singularly. Things have regional impacts, and maybe the placement shouldn't be here. It should be here because it just makes more sense in terms of transportation, jobs, et cetera, et cetera. We're not smart about that. And we can get, on a whole spectrum of things by looking at it more regionally based, more, bringing all the players together, we can make smarter decisions.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot to be thought about here, but one thing on the flip side of this, we talk about these, it sounds good, saving money, more efficient, but we're in Connecticut, I'm from New Milford, grew up there, founded in 1717, go Green Wave. How do you tell the local leaders who are there every day on the ground doing it that somehow the state would be better at overseeing it, or that the ACR, what is ACR, am I saying that right?
ACIR.
ACIR, has better ideas than they do? Like, not the better ideas, but how do you convince a state like Connecticut, where we have very proud traditions,
Sure.
to change something as fundamental as the structure of town government?
Well, I think we hear that all the time, right? From
that's the fear, yeah,
right. And oftentimes you'll also hear, well, we share our animal shelter with the town next door, so we're regionalizing. That's fine, right? But as John says, that's not going to change the mill rate in the town. It's great that they're doing that, and you hear it from a lot of smaller town chief executives that say, look, and they're right about this. One size does not fit all, right? You could suggest to us, for example, with a health district that, if we were to join a more regional health district, that we've tried that and it actually is costing us more than if we provided ourselves, right? So that's why you need to have some more objective, real data that backs up the argument for why, not that the state takes it over, but that the way you're providing the service is not the most efficient way to provide it. So, for example, in New Milford, the particular service, let's say the assessor's office, right? Well, if New Milford and 10 other towns around them have their local council, their COG,
which is comprised of those local
communities, have one entity do all of it for the region, then see what the cost estimate would be for New Milford's share of that, right? And if we can determine that New Milford's going to save money by doing it that way, well, we can measure it, and then we can also, the state can incent New Milford to do that by giving it more money in its grants, right? So that's that's using the carrot and stick approach, but really the carrot is just more money that's available to that community if they do what I think everybody recognizes is what the goal is. The other piece I'd add to this is that it's similar to this whole thing about call centers or fire departments. It's very difficult politically for a chief executive in these towns to suggest on their own, I'm going to try to, ask any of John's first select people, well, I'm going to combine my assessor's office with the town next door. Well, they don't get any benefit politically for doing that. And some residents may give them a hard time. Say, well, I don't want to work with the town next door on that. Why? So what they'll tell you privately is, if you give us the reason to do this, we'll do it. We know it's coming. We know it has to happen. We know it's unsustainable the way we do local property taxes right now.
Yeah.
And how we pay for services and spend money on services. So if the state basically creates that incentive, then I can go to my police chief and say, come on, we're losing money by you insisting on having your own call center here. Let's combine with the, 4 or 5 other towns or 10 or 15 or 30 other towns for one call center. That'll give us more state money.
Yeah.
And that will help that will move the needle. That will lower our property tax.
So really, it's not, the state's not coming and taking something.
State's not taking
the
it
state's
over.
Removing obstacles, or the idea is for the state to remove the obstacles to allow the towns, maybe through the structure of the COGs and those leaders,
and create and help facilitate towns to be able to do that,
to do it for themselves
by reinforcing the COGs, and also having a state government that is actually responsive to this and can actually answer and provide resources to help towns do it.
So the state, you as you say it, is support removing obstacles so that the town leaders, perhaps through the COGs, can implement the changes that are best for their region.
It's really enabling a COG like mine to do what the elected officials want to do. And it's gonna be different from, say, my COG to one in Fairfield County. It's just it's a small state, but there's a lot of variety, and it varies by the size of the town. My biggest town is 17,000 people. They're the big town. I have the smallest town in the state union with 855 people. I mean, that's a little different dynamic as to what they need or don't need for services
in larger areas.
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all in Connecticut, but I think in some ways we're getting it, maybe the wrong way to phrase it, but we're getting the state out of the way, and we're enabling the chief elected officials through the COGs and the boards of ed through their rests to do more with what are going to be scarcer resources.
All right. So shared services doesn't mean removing authority or the voice from the local leaders. It just means them working collaboratively.
Yes.
As you define it. So you're on the transition team. We've got a new governor coming in. What's your kind of top hope for the incoming administration? What's the first step?
None of this can happen without the governor getting completely behind this and putting his shoulder to the wheel to move this boulder. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mixed my metaphors. That lack of executive support for this over years and across administrations is the reason we're not doing this right now.
So
Right.
it's not just current administration; it's previous
It's
administration.
previous administrations
kind
too.
of
Right. And 20 years ago, this was a political third rail.
Mhm.
You know, people didn't want to talk about working with the town next door. But I think post-recession,
yeah.
everybody has seen efficiencies in their work lives and, you know, around them.
Mhm.
And I think now most taxpayers look around at their towns and say, why are we spending so much money on this and that when we could be combining our resources? So it's common sense now for, I think, most people. But the governor has to be the one to lead the charge. No question about it. It has to be and it's a big change the way people are used to doing things. And the only way that gets done is if you have a chief executive who is fully behind it. And this is what this governor.
And does that seem to be the case?
I mean, this governor ran on on a whole point about lowering people's property taxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see him over and over again in media appearances saying the state cannot continue to be in a position of subsidizing inefficiencies at the local level and at the state level, for that matter. So, you know, this is a new way of looking at things that is more realistic for what we can afford as a state.
And I think you saw that reflected with our shared services group, and the other 14 groups. They weren't just picked as Ned Lamont supporters. There was a cross section of people.
Who is this?
You know, we have people from labor. There's Republicans that are on the group. There's people from the education side. People from local government. CCM is there. So there's a spectrum of. There's a lot of voices at the table, and I think that bodes well because it's not a myopic view of it ought to be this way, and I need you just to reinforce what I already thought. We're bringing in people that don't necessarily agree, and we didn't agree on everything.
Yeah.
But I think we reached consensus that we have to move forward, and here's a spectrum of ideas and things that we can get behind and make some real change. Because again, we've been kicking the can down the road on a lot of issues for a number of years.
Yeah.
And to me, that road is dead. We've already hit the dead end a while ago. But
we're over the edge and in the embankment.
It's time to act. And I think part of what our call to action yesterday, what we released, is just that.
And released, and as of right now, we saw it in the Westerly newspaper in the Day in New London.
That's right.
If you want to check it out, and I'm guessing eventually that'll be available somewhere online.
Yeah, what happens now is that the transition team takes these recommendations from each of their committees and reworks it, and eventually on the 3rd and 4th of January, these proposals will be presented directly to the governor and lieutenant governor.
That's great.
So
this is the proposal from the committee, but the governor hasn't necessarily signed off on everything within it yet.
Exactly.
It's just a proposal that then he decides what he likes.
That's right.
Well, that's great. Until that comes out, if anyone wants to check out CCM's candidate bulletin on regionalism, you can find that on our website or on our Facebook. And with that, I think we're about done for the day. So I'd like to thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
I thank John Filchak, Executive Director of the Northeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, and Brendan Sharkey, former Speaker of the House. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer. Christopher Gilson is our producer. Harry Draws is on the boards. And I'm Matt Ford, your host. Thank you for tuning in.
on a star? Would you reappear, reject the dark? I heard the gospel true, heard it on the radio, on a Sunday morning, on a street in Rome. An angel rushed in to save me from my feral madness. At the edge of darkness, my life of wretchedness. I dream you looked into my eyes. Was there a sacred vision so deep inside? I wondered if I could hold